All right, so we talked a little bit about this model. We talked about feedback. Now let's talk about context. Context are all of the internal and external factors that affect the successful transmission of this message. That may be something as simple as timing, political affiliation. There are many different ways that these contextual factors can affect the message. And we'll talk about that in more detail later. But the idea is that where does academic writing fit in this conversation? Well, the burden falls on us as academic writers to front load our writing process, right? In academic writing, we call this pre writing. It's contingent upon our ability to think about who our audience is, what we need to communicate, how we need to communicate that via encoding, anticipate how that's going to be decoded, think about the best way that we can manifest our message into a channel, and also think about any of these contextual factors that may affect our message, right? And then be anticipatory regarding feedback. What feedback do we think we're going to get? And when we get it, how do we respond? As academic writers, we know that it's probably going to be a one and done. We have to front load the process. We have to think about our audience, think about the best way to organize our thoughts, because we know, unlike spoken word, we're not going to get the transactional process that you would have in real time as if you were communicating in real time, right? You know, this person sends a message by spoken word. This person frowns or distorts their face in some way, indicating they don't understand, sending feedback to the sender. They can immediately in real time change their message, maybe even the channel, and continue until their shared meaning. Well, in academic writing, we don't have that luxury, right? We have to plan and we have to mitigate ahead of time, preemptively, all of those things that would mitigate our message from being understood. And so that's what is important about that process. Writing and thought are inextricably bound. To write well, one must think well. And what that means is that your writing is a direct reflection of how you're thinking. And so if you find that you might write too conversationally, or that your writing is too informal, or you feel like your writing is just not really diving deep into the ideas or dissecting them in the right way, or they're not too critical, or analytical, then you have to change the way you think. The way you write. Of course, I'm getting hiccups right here. Sorry. The idea is that not only does the communication model tell us we have to front load the writing process, it also tells us we have to change the way we think to write better. You cannot separate writing and thought. If you are thinking unclearly, it's going to be translated very explicitly in your writing. And so the idea is to tap into a critical mind frame or analytical mind frame where you're thinking of all of these contextual factors, you're thinking of the communication model, and we'll practice that in this class. We write to make contact with the audience. What does that mean? We write to make an impact with our audience. We want them to understand clearly, but usually as academic writers, we want them to respond in some way. It's not enough to say, I understand. We want you to change your attitudes, opinions, and beliefs typically. And so what do we do to maximize that opportunity? Well, we have to reduce static or noise, as I previously mentioned. Static and noise it's all of these things that distance the reader and the writer, the sender, the recipient. The more of these static or noise present in our writing, the less contact or impact we make with our recipient, right? And so I think of this as white noise. Think of this as static on a TV screen. Clearly, it does nothing. It is a barrier between what could be a message and what is clearly not a message, right? So in our writing, we have to think about that. The slide in front of you is a semantic, but it can also be called semiotic triangle. We're going to talk about this in another slide, so I'm going to skip past this. Let's really focus on this idea of static. I'm going to go ahead and populate these items on the slide. Types of static. What inhibits your message, right? What prevents your message from being best understood in terms of writing? The first two items on this list are cliche and trite expressions. These are things such as, it's raining cats and dogs, at the end of the day, in conclusion. So a cliche is an expression, idea, or element of an artistic work which has become overused to the point of losing its original meaning or effect. A trite expression is not interesting or effective because it's being used too often, not fresh or original. Both of these would entail that, whatever phrase is being overdone, it's overused to the point where usually it's perpetuated in spoken words so much to the point that when we read it, it's blank space, right? And so the idea is to eliminate those phrases. You want to take any of those conversational phrases out of your writing as much as possible. Another type of static, unorganized flow of ideas and content. This shows or is reflective that you did not plan, did not outline your writing in some kind of way. You didn't think of how one idea would translate to another or transition to another, or you didn't focus your ideas enough. That's another type of static. The reader will follow along. If it's clear in your mind that your ideas or your thoughts weren't organized, when you put it in writing, the reader will equally see that in equal measure. Grammar, punctuation, and mechanical mistakes. If you make those mistakes, it automatically reduces your credibility, so the reader is less inclined to think of you as someone they can trust. And thus, anything you produce, any writing you produce, they would be less likely to take seriously, right? Conversational elements. Choppy conversation is utilized in spoken conversation. One of the most predominant issues that you see with incoming college writers is that you write as you speak because you have less experience really making your sentences elevated or at a level of university or college caliber. And so out of default, out of the experience that we all have, most of the time writers write like they speak. They think, in my mind, I think this, so I'm going to translate it as this on paper. And we think in terms of how we talk to other people. And so that's another challenge of writing because you have to divert from that mentality. You have to go from, this is how I would translate this as if I were speaking to someone, to this is how I would write this to be most effective for my intended audience. And so they're usually out of default. There are myriad elements of conversational elements that need to be reduced. How do we make contact? I put this on here for a reason. Sincerity is functional. It's in the planning and work you attribute to your writing. Sincerity, and what I mean by that is, what is your true intent? How intent are you to convey your message to the recipient? It's functional. If you are truly intent on being super clear to your writer and your writing, then it's going to be reflected in how you design your communication, how you outline, how you organize your ideas, the words you choose. Again, matching language with the context of the intended audience, that's part of that. You're looking at your audience and you're asking, how can I best encode this message in a way that they will understand? And so you're thinking of all the factors that could affect the message, right? And the audience. Who is my audience? How do I break them down? How do I segment my audience? And so it's just thinking about pre-writing, thinking about front-loading the process. Understand how to be a better writer. I say one must discover their natural voice. What I mean by that is how to be a better writer. It's going to take self-criticism. It's going to take understanding that people are going to point out things you do wrong in your writing, and you have to embrace that. You have to understand, okay, I've clearly not been writing in the best way possible. I need to embrace better strategies. I need to employ better strategies. It's going to take hard thinking because this stuff is not easy. You're going to have to think of how to rewrite your sentences. You're going to have to rethink of how you think of grammar, subject, predicate, object to a different, more complex sentence structure. And so it's going to take some hard, dedicated thinking and some analysis, breaking down why you thought the way you thought to be the writer you are today. And we will work on this in class. And also ambition. It's going to take you wanting to be better. If you couldn't care less, then none of this is going to help you. You want to be a better writer, I promise you. There are so many examples of people I know who have gotten jobs just because they are effective writers. And so I just really want to impart the importance of understanding that this is not just a class. This is a life skill that you will take with you. Something else to point out, objectivity is paramount. Understanding oneself leads to thinking outside the self, creating objectivity. Another primary issue with most incoming academic writers is that you've been trained throughout your life to provide your opinion, your attitude, what you think about certain subjects. When you start writing at the academic college level, you separate yourself from your opinions, your attitudes, your beliefs. Sounds counterintuitive, but it is what it is. There is no place for yourself in academic writing. In fact, the purpose of academic writing is to let data, claims, neutral, objective facts make the point for you. It allows us to suspend bias and to suspend attitudes, based on who we are, our subjective life experience, and to instead rely on objective facts and data to prove our points for us. And so this is something that's challenging for most new writers, to separate yourself from it. And when you start writing in response to certain prompts, you have to learn that it's not about you. It's about the prompt. It's about the idea. How do you separate yourself? And instead, you can have a perspective or an analysis or a way to analyze a certain opinion or prompt, but you cannot be a part of it. You separate yourself from that and instead focus on the facts to make the point for you. We will talk about that in depth, but the objectivity allows you to properly encode thoughts to maximize concepts in contact with the recipient and audience. Remember, your audience is usually going to be varied, right? It's going to be lots of multidisciplinary, multi-perspective, multi-affiliated audience members. You can't just say the audience is going to be someone who receives my information. It's going to be someone who is multifaceted. The audience is going to be multiple people with multiple types of experience. And so we have to think, I need to take myself out of this and instead think of the facts and the data and the neutral points that are going to prove my points for me in a credibility or an academic sense. And that's something we will train ourselves to do. Finally, academic tone. Academic tone is defined as the collection of word choice, grammar, syntax, language, sentence structure, all of these things together used in order to academically and objectively convey meaning to another in writing. What that means is truly choosing more academic words, using more complex sentence structure, using language and verbiage that is far surpassing that of spoken word, to be more academic and to bolster your credibility so that people are more inclined to trust what content you produce. And we're going to work on this in depth, but the goal is to completely avoid writing as you speak, avoiding any element of spoken communication in your writing, avoiding any idioms or common expressions that you may sometimes see in spoken communication, and at all costs avoiding being informal.